Hey, Mike here. I just wanted to let you know that you can listen to Dark Poutine early and ad-free on Amazon Music, included with Prime.
Welcome back to Dark Poutine. I am Mike Brown.
And I am Matthew Stockton.
Welcome, Matthew. You were just singing the A-Team song.
Well, humming it, yeah. Da, 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 yeah.
And I was thinking, the only thing I really remember about the A-Team is the people who were in it and the fact that with all the machine gun fire, they never seemed to hit any individual. Nobody ever died. All these bullets flying around everywhere, and they were the worst shots ever.
I can't remember nobody ever getting shot.
I think it was because it was prime time and they knew kids would be watching. They didn't want to show people dying. What an accurate description of violence. More like the B-Team. Anyway, let's get this show on the road.
The views, information, and opinions expressed during the Dark Poutine podcast are solely those of the producer and do not necessarily represent those of Curious Cast, its affiliate, Global News, nor their parent company, Chorus Entertainment.
Dark Poutine is not for the faint of heart or squeamish. Listener discretion is strongly advised. We're not experts on the topics we present, nor are we journalists. We're two ordinary Canadian schmucks chatting about crime and the dark side of history. Let's get to it. Put on your toque, grab yourself a double-double and a Nanaimo bar. It's time to scarf down some Dark Poutine.
You are responsible for obtaining and maintaining at your own cost all equipment needed to listen to Dark Poutine. Dark Poutine can be addictive. Side effects may include, but not be limited to, pausing and questioning the system, elevated heart rate, pondering humanity, odd looks from colleagues as you laugh out loud at work, family members not into true crime worrying about you. Positive side effects may include some perspectives and opinions that you disagree with, as well as some wokeness and empathy. If you don't think Dark Poutine is for you, consult your doctor immediately.
This episode explores chilling events that unfolded at POW Camp 132 in Medicine Hat, Alberta during World War II. This prisoner of war camp, one of many scattered across Canada, became the site of two brutal murders that shocked even hardened veterans and led to Canada's last mass execution. In the summer of 1943, Auguste Plaszek, a former French Foreign Legion soldier forcibly integrated into the German army, met a gruesome end at the hands of Nazi hardliners within the camp. Just over a year later, in September 1944, Karl Lehmann, a university professor turned Luftwaffe interpreter, suffered a similar fate for daring to share the news of Germany's failing war effort with his fellow prisoners. These murders, born from the complex dynamics of a little piece of Germany transplanted to the Canadian prairies, would set in motion a series of dramatic trials that tested the limits of Canadian justice and international law. This is Dark Poutine episode 362, POWs in Canada and the Murders at Camp 132. The concept of prisoners of war, POWs, has existed for as long as warfare itself. In ancient times, captured warriors were often treated as personal property of their captors and forced into slavery. During the Middle Ages, the practice of ransom developed, making it beneficial to capture wealthy soldiers. The modern treatment of POWs began to take shape in the 17th and 18th centuries as war came to be viewed as a relationship between states rather than individuals. This shift in perspective led to more humane treatment for those officially classified as prisoners of war. The devastating Battle of Solferino in 1859 served as a catalyst for change. Shocked by the lack of care for wounded soldiers, Swiss businessman Henry Dunant published his experiences. He proposed the creation of a permanent relief agency and a government treaty to protect workers in war zones. His efforts led to the establishment of the Red Cross and the first Geneva Convention in 1864.
Yes, that was a while ago.
A little bit, yeah.
Battle of Solferino. Okay,
Yep.
so my husband's a little bit of a
History nerd?
European history nerd, so
Of
we're
course.
talking about this. So this is back when Italy was a bunch of different kingdoms, right?
Mm-hmm.
The Kingdom of Sardinia worked with France, with Napoleon, to fight Austria to try
Right.
to unify, right?
Yep.
And the thing is, this involved 300,000 troops.
It was a big war.
This specific battle was 300,000 troops,
That's a lot.
40,000 were wounded
Whoa.
and dead or dying in the battlefield. So this guy, Henry Dunant, he was a businessman. He witnessed it. He saw the battle happen. And he wrote a book called A Memory of Solferino that really hit a nerve across Europe. And it was seen as sort of a call to consciousness, right?
Yeah.
And in the book, he suggested creation of voluntary relief societies and drafting formal international agreement, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I think why this sort of picked up now instead of before was the fact that there was rising nationalism and unification movements across Europe, right? So Italy and Germany, and armies were mechanized, and there were much higher casualties and much shorter time frames than any other war, right? And at the same time, there was a liberal Enlightenment ideas that were including humanitarianism and internationalism and moral responsibility that was gaining traction in Europe. So all of these things sort of fit that moment, right? This idea of moral idealism and pragmatic cooperation. So that's why it hit when it did. Yeah.
And thus the famous Geneva Convention is born, and the Red Cross, who they've done what they could in battle zones, but, some people argue that their effectiveness has waned over the years.
Yeah.
It is what it is, but that's where that all started. Over the following decades, the Geneva Conventions expanded to address the treatment of POWs more comprehensively. The 1929 Geneva Convention marked a significant milestone in international humanitarian law. Signed on July 27, 1929, and entered into law on June 19, 1931, this treaty expanded on previous agreements to provide more comprehensive protections for prisoners of war. The convention included 97 articles detailing the rights and treatment of captured combatants, a substantial increase from the 16 articles in the 1907 convention. Key provisions of the 1929 Geneva Convention included the prohibition of reprisals and collective penalties, regulations on prisoner labor, and the right for prisoners to designate representatives. It also clarified the famous name, rank, and serial number rule, stating that prisoners were only required to provide this basic information and could not be coerced into revealing more. While the 1929 convention aimed to improve conditions for POWs, its effectiveness during World War II was mixed. The Allies generally respected the treaty with some exceptions, while Axis powers more frequently violated its provisions. Notably, Japan signed but did not ratify the convention, leading to widespread mistreatment of prisoners.
Since World War II, many of what were the Allied nations have continually ignored the Geneva Convention, as have many other countries, right? And sort of the legal arm, if you will, of the Geneva Convention is the ICC, International Criminal Court.
Yeah.
Most major military powers in the world, like Russia, the United States, China, Saudi Arabia, North Korea, Iran, either have never joined or withdrew from the ICC.
Mm-hmm.
And it's these groups of nations that often do things that are against the convention. Canada, on the other hand, I find really interesting, is we were actually one of the founding member states of the ICC and one of the strongest supporters of it.
Yep.
Something I'm pretty proud of. And in fact, back in 2000, we actually passed our own legislation, the Crimes Against Humanity and War Crimes Act, to ensure that we can prosecute international crimes at home, which is cool.
Go Canada.
Yeah, it's great. I mean, it's been used a few times. It's hard. Doing international criminal, it's laborious and it takes a lot of effort and a lot of money. And there's only been a few of them in Canada, but I think having it is better than not.
Mm-hmm. Some people say the ICC has no teeth and is useless, on the other hand, but that's a whole other episode. During World War II, prisoners of war were held in various locations across the globe, with significant powers establishing extensive networks of camps to house captured enemy combatants. Germany operated around 1,000 prisoner of war camps throughout the conflict. These camps were primarily characterized as offlegs for officers and stalags for enlisted personnel. The conditions in these camps varied, with Germany generally adhering to the Geneva Convention for Western Allied prisoners but disregarding it for Soviet POWs, resulting in millions of deaths among the latter group. Canadian prisoners of war faced harrowing experiences during World War II, with some enduring unimaginable cruelty at the hands of their captors. In the days following the D-Day landings in Normandy, a series of shocking incidents unfolded that would come to be known as the Normandy Massacres. As many as 156 Canadian soldiers captured by the 12th SS Panzer Division were executed in various locations across the Norman countryside. These killings ranged from spontaneous murders of individuals to premeditated mass executions. At the Abbaye d'Ardenne, 20 Canadian POWs were systematically killed in the Abbey's garden over several days. We discussed the events at Ardenne Abbey in episode 99 of Dark Poutine, Remembrance Day 2019. The Chateau d'Audrieu became another site of tragedy where 19 Canadians were murdered after interrogation. The brutality extended beyond Normandy. In the Pacific Theater, Canadian POWs captured by Japanese forces faced severe mistreatment. Of the 1,975 Canadians deployed to Hong Kong, 1,685 were captured and 264 died over the next 3.5 years in prisoner of war camps. Prisoners suffered from malnutrition, disease, and abuses, including torture by their captors. Phil Doddridge, who was captured at the age of 19 during the Battle of Hong Kong, spent nearly 4 years in Japanese prison camps. He recalled the constant danger, saying, quote, "You avoid as much as possible attracting attention," end quote. The conditions in these camps were often brutal. Hormidas Fredette, also captured in Hong Kong at 24, shared a poignant moment of vulnerability. Quote, "One time I cried. I wanted to come home," end quote. For those held in European camps, the experience was no less challenging. One Canadian veteran described the shock of arriving at the Buchenwald concentration camp, where some POWs were housed alongside other political prisoners. The unnamed soldier recalled, quote, "As we got to the camp and saw what was inside, a terrible, terrible fear and horror entered our hearts. We thought, what is this? Where are we going? Why are we here? As you got closer to the camp and started to enter the camp and saw these human skeletons walking around, old men, young men, boys, just skin and bone, we thought, what are we getting into?" End quote. The struggle for survival was constant. In Japanese camps, starvation was an ever-present threat. George Durant, a Canadian POW, recounted the dire circumstances. Quote, "When I was 18, I joined up, and I weighed 185 pounds. When I got to Tokyo, I weighed 78 pounds, end quote. As the war neared its end, some Canadian POWs in Europe were forced on grueling marches as their German captors retreated. These death marches claimed more lives, with prisoners succumbing to cold, starvation, and illness. The full extent of these wartime atrocities would only come to light in the years following the conflict, leaving a painful legacy for survivors and their families. On the Allied side, the United States also set up numerous POW camps on its soil, housing primarily German, Italian, and Japanese prisoners. At its peak in May 1945, the U.S. held 425,871 POWs, with the majority being Germans, 371,683, followed by Italians, 50,273, and a smaller number of Japanese, 3,915. These camps were spread across the country from Arizona to New York and ranged from repurposed existing facilities to purpose-built compounds. In Canada, the prisoner of war camp system played a significant role in the nation's wartime efforts. The country operated 28 internment camps between 1939 and 1947, stretching from Alberta to New Brunswick. These facilities housed a diverse group of internees, including German combatant prisoners, German and Italian enemy merchant seamen, and civilian internees of German, Italian, and Japanese descent. Canada's involvement in housing enemy POWs expanded dramatically in 1940 when the British government requested assistance in managing its growing prisoner population. What began as a plan to intern Canadian enemy aliens quickly evolved into a large-scale operation to accommodate thousands of German prisoners of war. The Canadian government established camps nationwide, recognizing the potential economic benefits and the opportunity to contribute to the Allied war effort. The Canadian camps were spread across several provinces, as we mentioned, from Alberta in the west to New Brunswick in the east. Ontario housed the largest number of camps with 10 facilities, while Quebec also had a significant presence. Alberta was home to 4 major camps, including 2 of the largest in North America, Medicine Hat and Lethbridge.
Did you bump into any reason why British Columbia didn't have any of them in your research?
I didn't have to bump into it because I know what the reason is.
Okay.
The reason is Japanese internment camps here. We were already stretched to the limit by doing that awful thing.
And locking up our own Japanese-Canadian citizens.
That's right.
Yeah.
And we've talked about that in a previous episode. So that's why I knew the answer to that.
Yeah, it's like we already have like big camps that are full, right?
Yep, exactly.
Okay.
The POW camps in Canada vary greatly in size and capacity. Some could hold just a few hundred prisoners, while others could house over 12,000 POWs. Many of these facilities were repurposed from existing structures, such as pulp and paper mills, sanatoriums, and government forest research stations. Others were purpose-built to accommodate the influx of prisoners. In Ontario, camps could be found from the southwestern part of the province near London to as far north as 1,100 kilometers northwest of Toronto. Quebec's camps were situated around Montreal and to the east. The camp in New Brunswick was located near Fredericton, while Alberta's camps were spread across the southern part of the province. The camps at Medicine Hat and Lethbridge were each capable of holding up to 12,500 prisoners. The prisoners protected under the Geneva Convention were adequately housed and provisioned, sometimes to the envy of local Canadians living under wartime rationing. The focus of today's story is Camp 132 in Medicine Hat. Medicine Hat is a city in southeastern Alberta and has a history deeply rooted in Indigenous culture. The area was initially inhabited by the Blackfoot, Cree, and Assiniboine nations, who used the region for hunting bison and gathering along the South Saskatchewan River. The city's unique name, Medicine Hat, is derived from the Blackfoot word Samis, meaning medicine man's hat. Several legends surround the origin of this name. One popular story tells of a Blackfoot warrior who lost his war bonnet in the South Saskatchewan River during a battle. As it floated away, he exclaimed that it would become a powerful medicine hat. Another version recounts a winter of great famine during which a medicine man had a vision. He told his people that good fortune would follow if they sacrificed a maiden to the river. After the sacrifice, the medicine man's hat was seen floating down the river, signaling the return of prosperity. The modern city's development began in 1883 when the Canadian Pacific Railway, CPR, arrived to build a bridge across the South Saskatchewan River. A tent town quickly emerged, attracting early settlers, including Métis and Ontario-born immigrants. Medicine Hat was incorporated as a village in 1894, became a town in 1898, and officially gained city status on May 9, 1906. Throughout its growth, Medicine Hat has maintained connections to its Indigenous roots. The Samis Archaeological Site, one of the largest pre-contact sites in Alberta, serves as a testament to the area's rich Indigenous history. Today, the city continues evolving while preserving its cultural heritage, blending its Indigenous past with its recent industrial and agricultural developments. Medicine Hat's geography and existing infrastructure also influenced its selection as the site for Camp 132. The city's location, surrounded by vast prairies, provided ample space for a large-scale facility. The camp, spanning 50 hectares, as we mentioned, would hold over 12,000 prisoners, roughly the equivalent to Medicine Hat's population at the time. The presence of the Canadian Pacific Railway in Medicine Hat was another crucial factor. The railway provided a means to transport prisoners efficiently from eastern ports to the inland camp. Additionally, the area's established agricultural industry offered opportunities for prisoner labor, which became an essential aspect of camp operations. Construction of Camp 132 began in the summer of 1942. It received its first prisoners in January 1943. The camp was designated as a self-contained city, complete with barracks, mess halls, a hospital, workshops, and recreational facilities. This comprehensive setup effectively managed a large prisoner population while minimizing interaction with the local community. Life inside Camp 132 in Medicine Hat was a complex experience for many German POWs. The conditions at Camp 132 were surprisingly comfortable. Prisoners resided in one of 36 two-story barracks, 8 in mess halls, and had access to a 125-bed hospital staffed by German POW doctors and orderlies, a stark contrast to the hardships many had faced on the front lines. The abundance of food was particularly noteworthy for the prisoners. One account reveals, quote, "While they did not have enough food in the German forces, they had so much food in the POW camp that they asked for less, but still got so much that they ended up in food fights," end quote. This surplus was so significant that prisoners were instructed to downplay their conditions in letters home, writing only that they were, quote, "well according to the circumstances," end quote. Education and recreation played a significant role in camp life. By mid-1943, about 3,000 of the 5,000 POWs were taking courses in subjects ranging from languages to gardening and trades. Some even enrolled in correspondence courses offered by the University of Saskatchewan, paying their own fees. The camp also featured recreation halls for theatrical and musical performances, gatherings, and funerals. Many prisoners found opportunities to work outside the camp, which provided a welcome break from the monotony of camp life. POWs were employed in local businesses, such as Medicine Hat Greenhouses, Medicine Hat Brick and Tile, and Medalta Potteries Limited. Farm labor was another common occupation, with some prisoners developing close bonds with local families. One account notes, quote, "Many of the POWs who worked the fields developed a close bond with the families who were desperate for strong farm hands during these years," end quote. The treatment by Canadian guards was generally fair, with one prisoner recalling that, quote, "treatment through Canadians, or any other Allied soldiers, was extremely well," end quote. This positive treatment left a lasting impression on some POWs. Quote, "Some of the inmates even returned to Medicine Hat after the war because they found the conditions and opportunity favorable," end quote.
Yeah, and I think that's the quiet power of treating people with dignity, even in war.
Right?
Canada's humane treatment of POWs wasn't just about following rules. It was about choosing a moral high ground, right? Fairness fostered with respect, not resentment. And some prisoners, like you said, even returned after the war, not as enemies, but as neighbors, right? And had they been brutalized by us, right, what would they have taken home? Bitterness, more extremism, yep. Right? Instead, they carried this sort of strange gratitude. And I think that planted seeds of goodwill in a world that was trying to heal, right? And you know, Germany became Germany after this, right? And if we had treated them horribly, like, would it just have continued?
Yeah. I mean, there were examples. We won't get into them in this episode.
There's always examples in war, but I think overall how we treat people in war shapes the peace that follows the war.
Mm-hmm. Despite the relative comfort, camp life was not without its challenges. Barbed wire fences and guard towers surrounded the camp, a constant reminder of their captivity. As one description notes, quote, "Surrounding the enclosure was a single strand of warning wire approximately 1 foot off the ground. Prisoners were not to cross this wire without permission, as anyone who did so and ignored the guard's warnings would be fired upon," end quote. For many German POWs, their time in Camp 132 in Medicine Hat was a period of unexpected comfort and opportunity, far removed from the horrors of war that they had left behind. However, it was also a time of confinement and complex social dynamics within the prisoner population. There was, however, a darker undercurrent of fear within the camp led by Gestapo officers and other die-hard Nazis. The first murder occurred on July 22, 1943. Auguste Plaszek, a 40-year-old veteran of the French Foreign Legion who had been forcibly integrated into the German army after the fall of France, became the target of the camp's Nazi hardliners. Around 5 p.m. that day, Private Reginald Black of the Veterans Guard witnessed a chilling scene from his post in Tower No. 7. He saw a man waving a white cloth, desperately running toward the camp's warning wire, pursued by hundreds of angry, shouting inmates. Before the man, later identified as August Plaszek, crossed the warning wire, his pursuers caught him and dragged him away into a nearby building. From his vantage point, Sergeant Frederick C. Byers struggled to identify which prisoner was being dragged away and who was doing the dragging. Byers and Black called for scouts to enter the recreation hall to free the man, but their request went unfulfilled. After about 10 minutes, Private Black feared the worst, believing the man would most likely be dead due to the delay. A senior POW, Dr. Nolte, was among the first to discover Plaszek's fate. He found, quote, a body hanging by the west wall of the recreation hall. The rope had been wrapped twice around the victim's neck, cutting deeply into his flesh. Nolte felt for a pulse but, quote, found no sign of life and ordered the body to be cut down. The brutality of the attack was evident. Royal Army Medical Corps Captain W.F. Hall described the gruesome scene. Quote, the face of the deceased was very swollen, the tongue was sticking out slightly, and there was blood from the nostrils and mouth and also from the back of the head. It was a disturbing end for the diminutive former farmer, now thousands of miles from his wife and child in Europe. The killing sent shockwaves through the camp and set in motion a lengthy investigation by Canadian authorities. Even as they worked to unravel the circumstances of Plaszek's murder, Camp 132 remained a powder keg of Nazi fanaticism and factional tensions. Just over a year later, on September 10, 1944, Camp 132 witnessed another murder. Karl Lehmann, a 38-year-old former university professor and Luftwaffe interpreter fluent in English, French, and Italian, became the target of the camp's Nazi leadership. Lehmann had angered the camp's hardcore Nazi elements by reading articles from Canadian newspapers to his fellow POWs reporting on Germany's failing war effort. His assailants then hanged Lehmann from a gas pipe on the wall, and when the cord around his neck broke, they had strung him up again before leaving. The murders of Plaszek and Lehmann, separated by 14 months, represented grave breaches of discipline within the POW camp. They also posed a significant challenge for Canadian military and law enforcement authorities tasked with maintaining order and investigating serious crimes among the prisoner population. To understand how Camp 132 became the site of such shocking violence, it's necessary to examine the unique world that existed behind its fences, a little piece of Germany transplanted to the Canadian prairies, where Nazi ideology held powerful sway even as the tide of war turned against the Third Reich. Camp 132's population included many veterans of Rommel's vaunted Afrika Korps, young men steeped in Nazi indoctrination and fiercely loyal to Hitler. While Canadian authorities maintained overall control of the camp, the Geneva Convention allowed the prisoners to largely govern their own internal affairs. This created an environment where hardcore Nazi elements could exert significant influence over camp life. A clandestine Gestapo organization emerged among the prisoners, enforcing ideological conformity through intimidation and violence. Anti-Nazi prisoners, especially former members of the French Foreign Legion, like Plaszek, found themselves under constant suspicion and threat. The camp was also rife with intrigue and factional rivalries. Some prisoners maintained hope in ultimate German victory, while others recognized the war was lost. Clandestine radios picked up news from the front, fueling debate and tension. The arrival of new prisoners brought fresh information about the course of the conflict. It was against this volatile backdrop that the murders of Plaszek and Lehmann took place. While separated by time, the two killings followed a similar pattern. Prisoners suspected of disloyalty to Nazi Germany were subjected to interrogation by camp leaders before meeting violent death at the hands of fanatical elements. The brutality of the killings shocked even hardened Canadian veterans assigned to guard the camp. RCMP Corporal Reginald Bull, who led the initial investigation into Plaszek's murder, encountered a wall of silence from prisoners adhering to an omerta-like code. Those who did speak often provided only second- or third-hand accounts. Authorities worked to unravel circumstances of the murders and identify those responsible. They faced the challenge of penetrating the closed world of the POW camp. Investigators had to navigate complex prisoner social dynamics and overcome a pervasive culture of Nazi intimidation. The investigations would stretch on for months, relying on painstaking interviews with prisoners moved to other camps or work sites away from Medicine Hat. Slowly, a picture began to emerge of the events surrounding the two killings and the key players involved. But even as officials built their case, they knew that prosecuting the murders would be far from straightforward. The unique status of POWs and the difficulty of gathering admissible evidence posed significant hurdles. The stage was set for a series of dramatic trials that would test the limits of Canadian justice and ultimately lead to the gallows. More after a quick break. And we are back. Matthew, thoughts here on the halfway point?
Yeah, I think in hindsight, it's pretty clear that Canada could have done a little bit more to prevent extremist control within the camp on our own soil, right?
Mm-hmm.
You know, yes, the Geneva Conventions allowed prisoners to manage much of camp life.
But the Nazis!
Right, that doesn't mean that authorities had to turn a blind eye to sort of this intimidation and violence. And I think a more proactive approach could have included closer internal surveillance, you know, greater separation of these ideological factions. And early interventions instead of this leading up to murders like this.
It could have been very quiet what was going on, but, you know, the guards, they would know.
Absolutely. And, you know, Canadian officials largely respected the letter of the Geneva Conventions, but in doing so, I think they underestimated how dangerous the spirit of Nazi ideology remained within those people.
Right.
Some of them, right?
Yep.
Even behind the barbed wire. And I think that's a lesson. You know, humane treatment doesn't have to mean naive tolerance, right? And safeguarding POWs means protecting them from each other, right? And not following the exact letter of what's on a piece of paper, but making sure that this sort of stuff doesn't happen.
As 1944 drew to a close, the investigations into the murders of August Plaszek and Karl Lehmann had made halting progress. RCMP investigators, led by Corporal Reginald Bull, faced a formidable challenge in breaking through what was described as a wall of silence enforced by the camp Gestapo. The tight-knit community of German prisoners, many still fiercely loyal to Nazi ideology, proved resistant to Canadian authorities' inquiries. The tide, however, began to turn in early 1945 as Germany's military situation deteriorated. It wasn't until after Germany's unconditional surrender in May of 1945 that the truth began to emerge. As the Nazi regime crumbled and its influence waned even within the confines of POW camps, prisoners began to come forward with information. For the Plaszek case, witnesses eventually implicated three men, Adolf Kratz, Johannes Wittinger, and Werner Schwalb. One key piece of evidence against Kratz was his boastful comment at breakfast sometime after the killing, quote, "The egg tastes that much better because I have helped hang a traitor," end quote. As evidence accumulated, Canadian authorities built strong cases against the accused. On October 15, 1945, Johannes Wittinger, Adolf Kratz, and Werner Schwalb were arrested at the POW camp and formally charged with Plaszek's murder within an hour. At the trial, attorney Louis S. Turcotte argued that the Canadian courts lacked jurisdiction as the Geneva Convention should have applied. He also highlighted the indoctrination these men had undergone as soldiers of Nazi Germany. The prosecution countered with damning evidence. Witnesses testified to seeing Schwalb and Kratz dragging Plaszek to his death and Schwalb's reported boast at breakfast afterward. Despite Turcotte's efforts to challenge the evidence and split the trials of the accused, Schwalb and Kratz were found guilty, while Wittinger was acquitted. On June 27, 1946, Werner Schwab was executed at Lethbridge Provincial Jail. His last words were chilling. "My Führer, I follow thee."
Yeah, so this guy sounds like somebody whose mind wasn't going to be changed too easily.
No.
I would have preferred to see him put in jail for the rest of his life.
Think about it, yeah.
And to see how Germany came out of this and became a fantastic democratic country, right?
Well,
I think that would have been more punishment than killing him.
I think some people who were fanatics right to the end of their lives.
Yeah, there always are, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, some people don't take losing very well.
No.
Oh, well. It stings every time you lose, but eventually you understand that, it is what it is.
And you were wrong.
Sometimes.
Well, in this case, yes.
In this case. Adolf Kratz had his sentence commuted to life imprisonment due to insufficient evidence tying him directly to the killing blow. Meanwhile, Whittinger walked free. This marked the first time a prisoner of war had been executed on Canadian soil. The events leading to Lehmann's death were also rooted in the complex dynamics of Camp 132, where tensions between Nazi loyalists and those perceived as disloyal to the regime had been simmering. Lehmann, known for his linguistic abilities, had drawn the ire of the camp's Nazi leadership, reading articles from the Medicine Hat and Calgary newspapers to his fellow prisoners of war. These articles reported on Germany's failing war effort, a fact that the staunch Nazi supporters within the camp found deeply unsettling. Adding to the suspicion surrounding Lehmann was his association with a group of men who had served with the French Foreign Legion before the war. This group was suspected of plotting to wrest control from the Nazi leadership inside Camp 132, further cementing Lehmann's position as a potential threat in the eyes of the camp's Nazi elite who were clinging to power. The murder itself was a carefully orchestrated affair. On the night of September 10th, Lehmann was summoned to a meeting with the camp's leaders in North Lecture Room 6. Unbeknownst to him, this invitation was a deadly trap. The room's windows had been covered with blankets, obscuring the view from outside and ensuring privacy for the grim act about to unfold. Lehmann was surrounded by 6 conspirators strategically positioned throughout the space as he entered the room. Among them was Stabswachtmeister, Sergeant Major, Bruno Perzanowski, a fanatic Nazi who would later be identified as the ringleader of the group. Lehmann was instructed to sit on a bench. Perzanowski asked Lehmann if he knew of any radical activities in the camp. When Lehmann answered no, Willy Mueller, another conspirator, struck Lehmann in the head and neck, signaling the start of a brutal assault. The other men present joined in the attack, overwhelming Lehmann. In the aftermath of the initial assault, the conspirators proceeded to hang Lehmann from a gas pipe on the wall. However, the first attempt was unsuccessful as the cord around Lehmann's neck broke. Undeterred, the killers strung him up again, this time ensuring that their grim task was completed. With Lehmann dead, the conspirators dispersed to establish their alibis, leaving behind a scene that would shock even the hardened inhabitants of the POW camp. The timing of Lehmann's murder is particularly significant. Just months earlier, on July 20th, 1944, an attempt had been made on Hitler's life in what became known as Operation Valkyrie. News of this failed assassination plot had reached the prisoners in Camp 132 through clandestine radios. This event had only served to fuel the devotion of the camp's Nazi loyalists, leading to a vicious internal crackdown. Lehmann's murder can be seen as a direct result of this heightened atmosphere of suspicion and retribution. On April 6, 1946, more than a year and a half after Lehmann's murder, Canadian authorities arrested 4 men in connection with the crime: Bruno Perzanowski, Willy Mueller, Heinrich Busch, and Walter Wolf. These men, all of whom had been present in North Lecture Room 6 on that fateful night, were charged with Lehmann's murder. The subsequent legal proceedings would prove to be as complex and contentious as the circumstances surrounding the murder itself. The accused were defended by lawyer G.E. Rice, who had been appointed to the task by the Provincial Minister of Justice. Rice raised several questions to the proceedings, including an argument that under the terms of the Geneva Convention, the men should be tried by military court-martial under the codes of justice of the German armed forces. This objection and others raised by the defense were ultimately denied. As the trial unfolded, it became clear that the case was about more than just the murder of Karl Lehmann. It was a referendum on the persistence of Nazi ideology even after Germany's defeat and on the complex legal and moral questions surrounding the treatment of POWs. The prosecution argued that the actions of the accused demonstrated their continued adherence to Nazi principles even as the regime they had served crumbled. The defense, for its part, attempted to frame the killing as a legal execution under German military law, which they argued still held sway within the camp. They contended that Lehmann had been deemed a traitor by the German leadership in the camp and that his execution was therefore justified under Hitler's orders following the failed July 20th plot.
So that's insanity. Let's be clear, right? This wasn't justice. It was the last gasp of a Nazi ideology clinging to power through violence and fear, even in the POW camp.
Yeah.
And the defense could have dressed it up as military discipline, but what it really was cold-blooded murder carried out in the name of a defeated regime.
It was just their way to strike back at their loss, essentially.
Yeah, I mean, that defense just doesn't hold up. And I think the trial this trial wasn't just about who killed Karl Lehmann. It was about drawing a hard line between lawful wartime conduct and fascist fanaticism, right? And, Canada, as Canadians, we had to decide, would we allow Nazi ideology to justify murder on its own soil or call it what it was, like brutal acts of vengeance masquerading as honor, right? Right. And I think you go on and tell us about this. How did we end up dealing with this, Mike?
Yeah. Well, this is how we dealt with it.
Yeah.
The defense arguments fell on deaf ears. The jury ultimately found all 4 defendants guilty of murdering Karl Lehmann. They were sentenced to death by hanging, a punishment that they found particularly galling. As dedicated Nazi soldiers, they had hoped for execution by firing squad, which they considered a more honorable death befitting their status as soldiers. Despite appeals and debates over the appropriateness of the death penalty in these cases, the sentences were carried out. On December 18, 1946, Bruno Perzanowski, Heinrich Busch, Walter Wolf, and Willie Mueller were hanged together at the Lethbridge Provincial Jail. This event marked Canada's last mass execution. The condemned men remained defiant to the end, still committed to Nazi ideology. Adding to their indignation about being hanged rather than standing tall in front of a firing squad was the fact that they were to be hanged alongside Donald Sherman Staley, a former Canadian soldier convicted of child molestation and murder. Nathan M. Greenfield, in his book Hanged in Medicine Hat, argues that G.E. Rice was correct in arguing that the trial should have taken place in military courts rather than civilian ones, as stipulated by both the Geneva Convention of 1929 and Canada's War Measures Act. Greenfield contends that POW camps are not natural environments and that the defendants could have legitimately feared for their lives had they not carried out the orders of the camp's Nazi leadership. He also points out that the Canadian government had, to some extent, recognized the operation of German military law within the camp, turning a blind eye to certain disciplinary practices. It's worth noting that Camp 132 was unique in Canada for these murders. As Andrew Theobald points out in his review of Greenfield's book, quote, "The only camp in which German prisoners murdered their comrades was Medicine Hat." The events at Camp 132 left an indelible mark on the community of Medicine Hat and added a dark chapter to Canada's wartime history. They serve as a reminder of the complex human dramas that played out far from the front lines during World War II, where prisoners grappled with conflicting loyalties and ideologies, sometimes with deadly consequences. These incidents also contributed to the ongoing evolution of international law regarding the treatment of prisoners of war. The horrors of World War II, including events like those at Camp 132, prompted a significant overhaul of the Geneva Conventions. In 1949, 4 new Geneva Conventions were adopted, with the third convention explicitly addressing the treatment of prisoners of war, covering aspects such as living conditions, labor, discipline, and criminal trials. Today, the murders of Plaszek and Lehmann and subsequent trials remain a subject of historical debate and fascination. They offer valuable insights into the tensions and conflicts that simmered within POW camps, as well as the challenges faced by nations in upholding justice while adhering to international law during times of war. As we reflect on these events from our vantage point in 2025, they serve as a stark reminder of the human costs of war and the enduring impact of ideological extremism. The story of Camp 132 reminds us of the importance of vigilance in protecting human rights and maintaining the rule of law, even in the most challenging circumstances. And that's it for Dark Poutine episode 362, POWs in Canada and the murders at Camp 132.
That's right. It's time for voicemails. You can leave us a message at 1-877-327-5786 or 1-877-DARK-PTN. We'd love to hear from you. Let's see who called us this week.
All right, we have a voicemail this week. I don't know what this person's going to say, but let's carry on.
Hi, Mike and Matthew. This one here is for your voicemail system voice thing that puts it into text. Fuck, shit, bit, damn, mother, tabarnak, esti de calice de crise de marde. Have a nice day, guys.
Holy smokes. You said a lot of dirty words.
That's so funny.
Whoa. And obviously calling from Quebec. Holy smokes. And so what it said, I'm reading because she wants me to read what it translated it to.
Okay.
It says, this one here is for your voicemail system voice thing that puts it into text and it. Bitcon mother star Tabamac, whatever that is. The call is that gives them out, have a nice day, guys. So it obviously cannot translate Quebecois French.
Or
Calice Tabernac.
Or some swear words. That's hilarious.
Oh my goodness. I don't know if I'm going to leave that. I don't know if I'm going to leave that one word in. There's she said the C word in there.
Oh yeah, we're not British.
Right.
It's so funny. It's so funny how different words create different effects in different countries.
Yeah. Yeah, that one might be too much for some people.
It's really interesting. Just beep her out, and then we'll talk.
Yeah.
Beep beep beep.
Well, we're talking about it now, so it was beeped. Yeah, I beeped it.
Oh, did you beep it?
Yes.
Sorry,
Yeah.
I got to hear all the swear words.
Yeah. It was the C word referencing either lady parts or something else. Obviously, this person is somewhere in Quebec. Whereabouts in Quebec do you think our caller is from?
She made me blush. Montreal. That's
Montreal? Okay, yeah.
Definitely Montreal.
Definitely Montreal. And, okay.
And she's a linguistics major.
100%. Linguistics major focusing on Swahili, actually.
Speaking of the C word, she's a cunning linguist.
A cunning linguist. Yes. Holy smokes. I am red-faced.
So am I.
Look
you know
at this.
How much it takes me to blush, Mike?
Me too.
You blush easily.
Oh, I've heard a lot of words, and I don't think I've ever heard that particular one from a caller. Woo. Holy smokes.
That's hilarious.
I think I'll live. I don't know.
Sacre bleu.
Sacre bleu is right, Matthew. But I mean, if you say tabernacle and calice, it's kind of the same thing in French. Those things, it's interesting that French Canadians choose religious icons as their swear words, because calice is the chalice in the Catholic Church, and tabernacle is the tabernacle. It's really fascinating. Apparently, Parisian French, French. They don't use as many religious icons, and it again goes to sexual things, like English, which is it's fascinating. That's it for this week's voicemails. Again, you can leave us one at 1-877-327-5786 or 1-877-DARK-PTN. We'd love to hear from you, even if it is just to say hi and to tell us to go shit in our hats. If you're stumped for what to chat with us about, a quick story is welcome. So we don't have any patrons, or we do have a patron this week. Yes, and that person's name is Tay, Tay. No last name, just Tay. And Tay. And what do you think, where do you think Tay lives, and what do you think Tay does?
I think Tay lives in Prince Rupert.
Okay, Prince Rupert, British Columbia, yep.
And owns a Bannock bakery.
A Bannock bakery.
Yeah.
Okay, so a Bannock bakery. I don't think, honestly, I can't quite recall whether or not I've actually ever had Bannock, which is a shame.
Well, why don't we go? There's a place that serves Bannock in town here.
Okay, let's go.
Let's do it.
Let's go to an indigenous-run restaurant.
I had Bannock in the hospital.
Did you?
I did, because the mother-in-law of the guy sharing the room with me brought some.
That is very kind of them to share. Either that or the guy didn't like Bannock and just said, here, you can have mine.
No, she gave it to me.
That's very nice. Thanks to all our patrons and Donut Money donors, past and present, for your generosity. It helps to keep the show going. You can become a patron of Dark Poutine at patreon.com/darkpoutine. For a one-time donation, you can send us donut money via PayPal or interact using our email address, darkpoutinepodcast@gmail.com. If you don't already subscribe to the show, it would mean a lot if you did. You can easily find Dark Poutine on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to your favorite shows. If you haven't gotten yours yet, my 2 books are available to order via links on the Dark Poutine website or anywhere fine books are sold. And speaking of darkpoutine.com, check it out for show notes and other cool stuff. We'd appreciate it if you gave Dark Poutine a like or a follow on Facebook and Instagram. Most importantly, thank you for listening. Tell your friends about us. Word of mouth is a powerful thing. Alrighty, and that is it for this episode of Dark Poutine. So until next time, elbows up, Canada, and don't forget to be a good egg and not a bad apple.
Because there are enough of those already.
Certainly.